Hello. How's everybody doing? So we could do one of two things. We could either sit here and finish watching this trivia, or we could talk about building web applications with SQL Azure. So which one is it going to be? Trivia or SQL Azure? Azure? All right, let's talk about Azure a little bit. Are we on? We are on. So good afternoon / morning. I'm not sure what time you folks woke up, being that this is Las Vegas. My name is David Robinson, and I'm a senior program manager on the SQL Azure team. And today we're going to be talking about building web applications with SQL Azure. And like any presentation, we always like to start with a couple questions, just to see what you guys know about the product and just to kind of gauge it. So who here knows about SQL Azure? Good. Who here knows that SQL Azure is a relational database and not a property bag store? Okay, even better. Who here is actually using SQL Azure? Could be better, could be better. Who here is going to be exercising the what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas clause? Only a couple. Come on, guys. It's not just about learning. It's also about having a good time. So tonight's your night, guys. So what we're going to do is we're going to first go over and look at the Windows Azure platform overview, just to level set, to understand a little bit more about what are the different products inside the platform, different services. Then we're going to talk about how you can access SQL Azure using PHP. There's tons of PHP developers out there. There's tons of PHP applications out there. You can access SQL Azure with PHP, and we're going to show you how. Next, we're going to talk about SQL Azure on Silverlight and Windows Phone 7, and how you can use WCF RIA services to connect up to your SQL Azure database and have a rich experience in your web applications. And then we're going to talk a little bit about location-aware applications. So why are we here? Well, hopefully most of you write web applications. And web applications, typically they store data. And SQL Azure is a relational database in the cloud. And throughout this presentation, we're going to be showing you why SQL Azure is uniquely positioned as the best data platform for web applications. I'm going to say that again. The best data platform for web applications. And throughout this presentation, we're also going to be showing you some new features that aren't available, and just start to be a little bit more transparent in what we're doing back in Redmond. We've gotten a lot of feedback from people saying, listen, I need to be able to plan. This is a new platform, and we get that. And you guys, we get the fact that you guys want to know a little bit more about what we're working on. So I'm going to use this presentation today to start to give you a little glimpse into some of the new features, and more importantly, when those features will be available for you guys to use. If we consider the Windows Azure platform, it's Microsoft's cloud-based platform for rich applications. The developer experience allows you to utilize all the existing tools and knowledge and expertise that you currently have. So tools like Visual Studio and Eclipse, which I'll use a little bit later, Python and PHP, it all works with the Windows Azure platform. Along the bottom, we have the different services that compose the Windows Azure platform. On the bottom left, we have Windows Azure, and I'm sure some of you have seen some Windows Azure sessions this week. Windows Azure is the operating system of the cloud, and with it, provides compute, storage, and management services of your applications. We also have Windows Azure App Fabric, which provides you connectivity and access control services for your applications. And what that means with this connectivity, you can actually have pieces of your application running on-premise and use App Fabric to be able to connect to them through your firewall. Phenomenal services. App Fabric also has access control services so that you can securely federate your application with other federated providers. Also, as we announced at PDC, we have something project code named Dallas, which is your premium marketplace for content. A lot of times ISVs and small mom and pop shops, if they want to go ahead and build an application and use somebody else's data store, something like maybe it's some spatial data from ESRI or it's Navtech data, you would have to go out and purchase that data set, and typically it's very cost prohibitive. With Dallas, you can consume those data sets and pay on a consumption model. It's a really great platform. And today we're going to be talking about SQL Azure. SQL Azure is the relational database of the Windows Azure platform. It contains a relational database with management features built into it. And we like to say that SQL Azure delivers the value of a hosted relational database with the differentiated benefits of a managed database as a utility. We want you guys to start to take things for granted. When I came up here about a half hour ago and I plugged my laptop in, I took for granted that there was power there. With SQL Azure, you can walk up to the service and in a matter of seconds provision a server and provision a database. In a matter of seconds. Take for granted your data will always be there. We're not going to go into too much details about the architecture of SQL Azure, but built with it has a SQL query processor and a familiar relational model. This is based upon the SQL Server 2008 code base. It's the same SQL Server. And you'll hear me say that over and over and over. It's just SQL Server. But at the same time, if you combine SQL Server with these as a service or as a utility components, built into the service, we have things like high availability and disaster recovery. The ability to scale out your databases in an instant. We have a customer that we like to talk about called Ticket Direct. And what Ticket Direct does is they sell, and is the Ticket Direct guys here? They're not. So what they do is they're like Ticketmaster overseas. And what they do is when Britney Spears or Hannah Montana goes and has a concert, they need to very quickly be able to handle a large amount of capacity. Because when ticket sales happen, those tickets typically sell out in a matter of minutes, if not 1 or 2 hours. So if you have 30, 40, 100,000 transactions coming into a single database at a single time, you want to make sure that you have the capacity to meet those demands. Because that's a pretty demanding workload. So what Ticket Direct does is the night before a ticket sale, they actually will go ahead and they'll spin up, I think it's about 100 different databases. And what they do is they partition their workload so that each database handles the workload for a specific section in the venue. So that way, when they spin it up and they scale out their workload, not only do they have 50 or 100 databases, but they have 50 or 100 sets of CPU, 50 or 100 sets of memory, and 50 or 100 individual machines that are able to handle this load. Once the spike is subsided, they spin it back down to a single database. And for that 100 databases, they pay 33 cents a day. So 33 cents for 100 databases, they're paying next to nothing for this incredible capacity. With SQL Azure, because it's a cloud service, we're able to very quickly iterate and very quickly provide you new service updates. And we have regular service updates every 8 weeks. And it's based upon your feedback. When customers come up to us and say, listen, I need DMV support, or I need spatial support, or I need support for this variant of T-SQL, it's that feedback that we take. And I got to be honest with you, it's based upon all of your feedback. You provide us feedback about a specific feature, we will do our best to go ahead and enable it. So your feedback definitely matters. And throughout the session, we're going to have these new feature alerts. And once again, based upon your feedback, we have enabled some new additional features. One of the critical pieces of feedback we received was, hey, so you have this 1 gigabyte database, and you have this 10 gigabyte database. What if I have a workload that needs 11 gig of storage? What about if I have a workload that I don't want to make the investment to go ahead and re-architect it for a scale-out architecture? So based upon your feedback, we're going to be introducing a 50 gigabyte database SKU. If you want to go ahead and get an early preview of this and become an early adopter of this 50 gigabyte SKU, drop us an email at engagesa@microsoft.com. And when you email that email address, it will auto-respond back with a survey for you to fill out to describe the workload of your application, and we'll get you onboarded onto the early preview of that. So what do you guys think about that? 50 gigs, good? No? Yes? Awesome? Good. Good. And to be honest, we're not going to stop there. We're not going to stop there. So let's talk for a moment about SQL Azure and PHP. Who here in the audience develops on PHP? We got only a couple. Are you guys typically Microsoft developers? Silverlight developers? Yeah? Okay, this is still relevant content. So Microsoft SQL Server Driver for PHP came out a few months ago, and it enables you to connect up to SQL Azure from PHP. Not to mention that PHP hosting is available on Windows Azure as well. So you can take your PHP application. We also have a migration assistant. So let's say you have a PHP application and it's currently running on a hoster and it's using MySQL. We have a migration wizard that will actually migrate your database from MySQL over to either SQL Server or SQL Azure. And then you can take that application and host it up on Windows Azure. We support PHP version 5.3. And if you download the deck, I have links to where you can go ahead and get this driver. You can either get the standalone driver or as part of the web platform installer. So let's actually jump out and take a look at the first demo. I apologize to those of you who don't use PHP. So what we're doing here is we're firing up Eclipse. So what I've gone ahead and done is I've actually downloaded the driver. I've also downloaded PHP 5.3. I went into my php.ini file and I enabled the SQL Server driver. And as you can see here, this is just a couple lines of PHP code. Let's scroll over. And if I scroll up here, I'm setting my server name equal to myservername.database.windows.net. This is on my account up on SQL Azure. I'm setting my user ID, my password. And I'm going ahead and doing a simple connect. After I do the connect, I'm doing a query to just basically select some data out of AdventureWorks. So if I right-click and go ahead and run this, stop it. Got a sensitive key touchpad here. Come on. Here we go. Let's run that. And what's going to happen is it's going to start up my PHP environment. It's going to load up my SQL Server driver. It's going to go ahead and issue my query against my AdventureWorks database up in the cloud. And hopefully, if the demo gods, I hope we don't start out like this with a bad demo. Let's give it a second. So what it's actually doing is querying my AdventureWorks database and displaying the data right here, all within PHP. So when we say Microsoft SQL Azure is the best data platform for web applications, it doesn't matter what language you write those applications in. It could be Silverlight, it could be PHP, it could be Ruby. It doesn't matter. Let's go back out to the slides for a moment. All right, here's another new feature alert. Mars support in SQL Azure. Anybody who knows what Mars is? A couple people? So available in SU2, which will be available in early April, we now support Mars inside SQL Azure. Once again, this is based upon your feedback. Based upon your feedback that you need to be able to have multiple SQL batches in a single connection. So what does this actually do? What Mars enables you to do is have a single SQL connection and have multiple batches on that connection. And it actually uses something called connection multiplexing to actually go back and forth between the multiple batches. It uses something called firehose mode. And what firehose mode does is it queues up all this data and starts sending it down to the client. And the faster you receive it, the faster it'll continue to send it. But that's something to keep in mind. Let's say you're using a data set, for instance, and you're going to go ahead and you're going to make updates to that. You will not be able to make those updates to that data set until the entire data set has been loaded. Just something to keep in mind. And as we can see, the Mars-enabled statements, things like select and fetch and bulk insert and BCP. So once again, based upon your feedback, that's the feature you guys said you wanted, and we're providing in SU2. So what about if you're a Silverlight developer, or I think most of you here are also interested in Windows Phone development? How do you go ahead and do it? Well, you need to do your data access over HTTP. And typically it required the use of a middle tier. WCF RIA Services provides a great new way for you to go ahead and expose your SQL Azure data. And we'll take a look at RIA Services in a few moments. But additionally, in the Day 2 keynote, we talked about this new SQL Azure OData endpoint. Some people call it the clickbox development. Some people call it the easy button. The ability to walk up and say, I have these resources up in SQL Azure. Let me very easily go ahead and expose that as an open data over the open data protocol. Is this something that you guys are excited about, something you guys want? Yes? That's great. That's great. So we're actually going to be launching that sometime this week. We just have some licensing issues. We're Microsoft. We got to make sure we have a EULA up and terms of service and all that stuff. So we're just finalizing all that stuff with our legal department now, and should be in your hands maybe hopefully sometime today. But provide us the feedback. If that's something you want to see us take and put into production, we need that critical feedback. So what about WCF RIA services in SQL Azure? Well, as we all know, and I'm sure there's been a whole bunch of other RIA services talks this week, RIA services simplifies the development of end-tier applications for rich internet applications, where your application logic still runs in the middle tier, and it helps you control access for CRUD operations. It provides you multiple formats, Atom, JSON, and XML, multiple transports, HTTP and TCP, and also multiple protocol support, as we can see on the slides. For those of you that want to go ahead and host your own middle tier, I highly recommend you take a look at the WCF RIA services stuff and how it works with SQL Azure. The great part about WCF RIA services is, if you think back when just typical web service development, there was no connection between your Silverlight app and your web service. You created your web service, you created your Silverlight app, you pointed it to it, and there was no binding between the two. With RIA services, it maintains the relationship between your Silverlight app and your middle tier to provide a much more richer experience when you're developing your applications. Here's a typical sample architecture where we have all of our different clients, and we can even put the Windows Phone 7 up there. We might even want to put an iPhone up there, talking to the app logic, which then goes ahead and performs the operations within SQL Azure. And if we want to take a look at another quick demo, we can see how easy it is to connect to SQL Azure right from Silverlight. Let's go here. So I used to be really crazy, and I used to actually do this stuff live, but I got burned a couple times, so now I'm starting to go more towards, let me go ahead and build the demo and actually show it to you, instead of actually creating it right here on stage. And as we can see here, we have our RIA services solution, and inside our main page, all we have is a data grid, which we can see right there. But inside here, we actually have an entity data model pointing to our AdventureWorks database. And this provides me a very rich experience for modeling my entities inside the system. So here we are. I have a couple tables. When I added these tables, it automatically looked at the schema. It was able to infer the relationships between the tables in my database. And all I simply needed to do was wire this up. And literally, in about 3 minutes, I had a Silverlight application with a middle tier hosted via WCF RIA services, and something that's blowing up on me here. That's beautiful. SL Demo 2 test page. Unhandled exception. No, I don't want to do that. See, that's exactly why I like to make sure I have the stuff running beforehand so I don't run into situations like this. Okay, let's move on. Since that didn't want to work, and I'm not going to debug it too much. So now that devices are becoming much more powerful, and people are starting to see how they can add more and more features to their applications, we're starting to see the proliferation of location-aware applications. Applications that perhaps I'm walking down the street and I have my iPhone and I want to find out what all the nice restaurants are around where I live. Or perhaps I'm a real estate agent and I want to be able to find out whether or not a property of mine is within a low-lying flood area. These are becoming very, very important and very, very critical features, and features that we're starting to see people request. So based upon your feedback, once again, we're adding spatial data support to SQL Azure. And that will be available in your hands in SU3. SU3, well, SU2 is coming out sometime in April. SU3 will be 8 weeks after that. 8 weeks after. If you want to get access and you want to become an early adopter of the product, drop me a note. Let's talk, see if I can get you access to the bits. But I just want to make sure you guys realize what this is. This is really a game-changing thing. SQL Azure will fully support spatial data in the cloud. We are the first cloud provider that has this feature. This is incredible. It's the native storage and analysis of spatial objects, facilitating the next generation mapping and web applications that need support for location. This is a killer feature. I kid you not. And what are spatial objects for those of you in the audience that aren't familiar with this? Well, if you think about a map, spatial objects are just features on the map. It could be things like buildings that we map using a polygon or a multi-polygon. It could be traffic lights or hotels that we use using a point or a multi-point on the map. Or it could be things like streets or freeways that we use using a line string or a multi-line string. And the great part about this is that you don't need to go ahead and learn anything new. You're going to be able to model your data, query it, and process it using the very, very powerful SQL engine built into SQL Server. This is a symmetrical feature as in SQL Server 2008. As we spoke about earlier, SQL Azure is based upon the same technology stack as SQL Server. We're able to very, very quickly iterate on the service and provide you the features you request because of that. So that when you say to me, we want spatial, we don't have to go ahead and recreate the wheel. We just have to go ahead, enable the feature, and make sure it works nicely in a multi-tenant environment. So with that, we have 2D vector support for the 2 new data types, geography and geometry. As we spoke about before, we have support for points, lines, and areas. And there's 70 different T-SQL spatial methods. Spatial methods that you could say, okay, go ahead and show me points along a route, or show me all schools within a certain zip code. With that, we also have high-performance spatial indexes on the data as well. And because we are supporting where the underlying foundation is SQL Server 2008, we have spatial industry standards support. So let's go look at a whole bunch of demos for spatial. Please work. All right, here we go. So let's start out with our old friend, SQL Server Management Studio. Okay, so notice where I'm connecting up to. I'm connecting up to actually a box sitting in the office back in Redmond, and that's the IP address of the box. So this is not any smoke and mirrors. It's not running on my local machine. I'm actually connecting out. And if I go ahead and click connect, let's take a look at what I have here. I have a bunch of different databases. And if I look at the tables inside Sample USA, I have things like geonames, states, and zip codes. So let's see what happens if I go ahead and do a quick query on this table here. Let me go ahead and select out a query. So what I'm saying here is select name, comma geography from states where the name is not equal to Alaska. It's just SQL, right? So let's see what happens when I actually go ahead and run that. And as this is running, keep in mind it's traveling over the internet connection I have here all the way back to Redmond and retrieving my results. So it just pulled back a list of states and a geography. And what I can actually do when this finishes running, and it just did, is I have a tab here that says spatial results. Let me just go ahead and highlight that for you. If I go ahead and click on the spatial results, I have a map. It's actually gone ahead and graphically showed me the geography that I've actually queried back. So this is nothing too crazy. I can do things like zoom in on it and whatnot. All built into SSMS. This is nothing new. Nothing new whatsoever. That's really not that powerful of a query, is it? No, it's not. Come on here. Here we go. Let's back that down. Let's look at another query for a moment. So what this query is going to do is it's going to declare a couple variables. It's then going to go ahead and show me all schools within a 1,000-meter radius around a specific zip code. If I hit F5, it just very quickly went ahead and showed me all the different schools. I'm able to use T-SQL to go ahead and perform these rich queries over spatial data. And once again, if I go and show the spatial results, it shows me where all those schools are. And I could have overlaid this on a Bing map. I could have overlaid this, using other graphical capabilities as well. If I want to just go ahead and just look a little bit more on that same query and enhance it a bit, I can go here, and all this is going to do is it's going to give me a little bit different of a look. It's going to actually show me, some radius around those points on the map. So with these new features, you can go ahead and start to think about, hey, how can I go ahead and add location-aware features to my application? Perhaps I'm a trucking company, and I want to be able to, in real time, save the coordinates of where all my shipments are. You can go and save those coordinates inside the spatial data types inside SQL Azure, and then go ahead and do rich queries over them. Let's look at some other rich things we could do with spatial. What's here? Let's go here. Let's run this. Hopefully this one doesn't get ugly with me. Okay, here we are. Wow, if that spatial analysis got cut off one more letter, we'd be in trouble. So what this is an application that's storing data inside SQL Azure and using Bing Maps. And what this will actually let me do is, let's pretend for a moment we want to go ahead and drive cross-country. It's always useful to know where all the gas stations are. And if I go back to my database, you will notice inside my table, inside of a separate database, I have a table called petrol stations. This is basically the location of all the different gas stations in the United States, which is used by this site. So if I go ahead and say, we look quickly, I want to travel from Las Vegas to San Francisco, and I want to show all gas stations with a 1,000-mile radius or a 1,000-meter radius. It's going to go ahead, it's going to use the Bing Maps API to actually figure out what the route is, and then it's going to perform those spatial queries against SQL Azure and pull up all the gas stations along my route. I have one more demo for you. One of the early adopters of our platform is a company called ESRI. And they produce some really, really phenomenal spatial and location-aware features for you to consume. And when they've written this application, and let's say that, for instance, I've had such a great time here in Las Vegas. I want to move here. But I have 4 small children. And I want to make sure that the area I move to has a certain demographic. There's kids for my children to play with as well. So what I can easily go ahead and do is I can select an area of the map. And after I select that area of the map, it's going to go ahead, go back to the SQL Azure database. It's going to figure out what all the census blocks are for the locations I just highlighted. And now I can simply mouse over an area, and it'll go ahead and perform the query. That's a bad one with I don't think many people live in actual hotels. But I can actually highlight and mouse over a specific area, and it'll actually do the query and tell me the age distribution of the census data for the people in that area, all using spatial data. And additionally, we can actually go ahead and provide comments on the map. So somebody went up here and said, I lost my wallet in this area, please help me find it. So by doing this, you can go ahead and save these comments with the specific spatial data inside SQL Azure, and then go ahead and perform additional processing on that data as well. Let's go back to the deck. So for further information, go out and sign up for SQL Azure. We have SQL Server Management Studio, which we talked about a little while ago, in both x86 and AMD 64 flavors. If you download the deck, there's links to all this stuff. There's also the Windows Azure Cloud tools for if you want to go ahead and start to utilize Windows Azure as your hosting platform as well. SQL Azure Labs will be up sometime over the next couple days, which you'll be able to actually go ahead and walk up to and enable your SQL Azure database as an OData feed. Additionally, the PHP 1.1 driver for SQL Azure is available. You can either get it, like we spoke about earlier, you can either get it standalone or part of the web platform installer. And then those are the release candidates for WCF RIA services for VS 2008 and VS 2010. And my deck doesn't have the updated link for the Windows Phone Series 7 SDK, but that shouldn't be too difficult to find. So what I want, we got a whole bunch of hands that went up for people that are currently using SQL Azure. For those of you that aren't, go out there and sign up for it. It's the best data platform. I kid you not. I do drink a lot of Kool-Aid back in the office, but it's seriously. If you want to go ahead and sign up for the 50 gigabyte database CTP, go ahead and drop an email to engagesa@microsoft.com. If you guys, we are hiring, so if you're passionate around SQL, passionate around the cloud, drop us an email at sajobs@microsoft.com. SU2 will be out in early April, and for your feedback, the way we go ahead and gather this feedback is we have this site out there called migrateSQLAzureIdea.com. And what that enables you to do is go out there, suggest a feature, and also vote for features as well. And then once we start to see those features start, cranking up in terms of votes, that starts to make us think, hey, maybe this is something we should enable. So things like larger databases, that was at the top of the list. Spatial, top of the list. So with that, let's open it up to questions. There's mics back there. If you could just speak into the mic.
What's the plans for file stream support?
What are the plans for file stream support? I can't comment on specifics as far as timeframes are concerned, because obviously this is Microsoft. We typically don't do that. But we are looking at file stream support and having those being stored inside Windows Azure blobs. So it is on. We are thinking about it. It is on the roadmap. I just can't comment on a time frame. But if that's something you want to see, once again, it's already listed on migrateSQLAzureIdea.com. Go out there and vote for it.
If we've if we have our own ORM framework that just uses SQL connection client, is it really as simple as just changing the connection string to use SQL Azure?
It is that. In most cases, I would say about 90–95% of the cases, it is that easy. It all depends on what features of SQL you're using. If you're using just core SQL Server functionality, yeah, you should just be able to change the connection string. If you're using any of the deprecated types that we don't support, then you'll have to convert those types over to the new updated types. That's another piece of feedback we get from people all the time, is that SQL Server marked certain features or certain data types and features for deprecation, replace them with better new ones, but then we still have people that go ahead and continue to use the deprecated features. So we got a lot of feedback on ensuring 100% compatibility with that. So is that something you guys are passionate about? Yeah? Okay. Question? Oh, I'm sorry.
Two questions, actually.
Yeah, go ahead.
What's the performance expectation of an individual instance?
What's the performance expectation?
Yeah. I mean, is it comparable to, you say maybe you need to scale out, but what level do you know that you need to scale out?
Well, it's important to call out that the SQL Azure Service Level Agreement does not make any performance guarantees today. We are looking into that, but it's really hard to compare apples to apples on a multi-tenant commodity server-based system and some really big metal that you might have in your office. Mm-hmm. What I would suggest is we have these deep dive labs back in Redmond where we allow customers to come out, bring us their application, and we'll give you the assistance to actually go ahead and migrate it to the Azure platform, not just SQL Azure, but also Windows Azure and App Fabric and things like that. If you want to try to get a feel for what that might look like, come on up or drop me an email, and I'd like to get you hooked up with those folks.
And does SQL Azure support things like triggers and
Oh, absolutely. SQL Azure. And maybe I should have called this out a little bit more earlier in the presentation. And I specifically didn't because of the fact that I thought most of you were aware of it. SQL Azure looks, feels, smells, tastes just like SQL Server 2008. So stored procedures, triggers, it's all there. It's all there. So when I walk up with SQL Server Management Studio or a data bind with Visual Studio or I consume it with PHP, it looks and feels and acts just like a SQL Server database. It's highly compatible at the database level. Where we're not highly compatible is at the server level. And the reason for that is that in SQL Azure, a server is more of a logical concept to provide you a grouping of your databases and to not break compatibility with older tools. So at the server level, that's when we start to drift a little bit further away from SQL Server. But at the core database level, extremely highly compatible. Sir?
Quick question about the tooling in Visual Studio. Is there plans to actually add query capabilities, viewing your databases from Visual Studio 2010?
So I'm not sure if I can say this, but I'm going to say it anyway. So, once Visual Studio 2010 releases, you will have support for SQL Azure in the product.
And you'll be able to use it in entity data model, and it'll know the connection strings and understand that?
Absolutely. The one thing you will not be able to do initially is actually, if you're just using core, if you're using the old data dude stuff, you can find your objects and you can consume them. If you want to create them, you'll be stuck using plain vanilla T-SQL.
Okay, so you can't create them, but you can do queries off of them.
Using the data dude stuff and using just traditional items. But if you move over to the entity data model, you're able to go ahead and do it both ways.
And last question, is there any plans to do something like a 5 gigabyte database? Because sometimes 1 and 10 is kind of constraining in the way you partition things.
Is there a plan to do a 5 gigabyte database? How do I answer this without getting into trouble? It's maybe not a specific SKU, but we are thinking about additional ways to pricing ways to make it more palatable for people.
Quick question.
Sure.
Currently, we have Windows Azure app, which is used in SQL Azure.
Awesome.
Then suddenly we start to get some timeouts.
Okay.
From the SQL Azure. Then we simply increase the timeout and the problem is when. Okay. But then we start to think on if it's should we using caching, for example, to once we send a query, start to cache all that data on the Windows Azure app, so we won't have some latency problems in the future. But so my question is more about which are the patterns of the architectural part that should be using if we start to use a SQL Azure, because it looks like for any developer, it looks like the SQL Azure box is right next to the Windows Azure box, but that's not true at all. So it's going to be a lot of things in the middle, and maybe that's the reason for the latency. So
a couple things to point out. Number one is, as long as when you go ahead and you deploy your Windows Azure application and you deploy it to the same region as your SQL Azure database, they live inside the same data center, so there should not be any latency from Windows Azure to SQL Azure from a query and CRUD operation standpoint. So the one thing I would suggest you take a look at is to make sure they're both co-located. Because we've seen a lot of instances where either Windows Azure was in a data center before us or we were there, that people didn't co-locate their applications, and all of a sudden they're like, oh my God, my application's performing so poorly. So that's one thing to keep in mind. I can't give you generic guidance specific to your application. If you want to come up and talk about the workload of your application, I would love to. But depending on what the application workload is like, you might want to introduce some sort of caching inside your app. I really need to see the workload. I really need, so feel free to hang out afterwards, and we can talk about your specific problem.
Because what I've seen is some people is even caching some results in the data store in the Azure stores. So
yeah, and I've also seen other people prop up other caching solutions. So caching is definitely an option, but it all depends on the workload. So definitely grab me afterwards and let's chat about that.
Hi, thank you very much for your session.
No, thank you.
I have a question. What is the stand for the SQL Azure? Does it allow running the data management views such as query over deadlocks, query over statistics? Because that information is very important for diagnosing what's happening in database, and usually the system views, data management system views, they are instance specific, not database specific.
Exactly, and once again, I know I keep on saying this about feedback, but you guys did give us that feedback, and we actually enabled a whole bunch of the DMVs in our previous service update, in Service Update 1. So if you go out to MSDN, you'll be able to see a ton of DMVs that are there to show you things like that. So check it out. We have enabled a whole bunch of those as well. And if there's, once again, if there's one specific ones you're looking for that are not there, let us know. We'd love to help out.
And is SQL Server Broker available?
SQL Server Service Broker is not currently available. It's something that we're considering. But it's not currently available. If that is a feature that you require, and what exactly would you use Service Broker for? Well, one of the guys on the team was a PM on that team, and he's always looking for, we got to get Service Broker up on Azure. So what exactly do you use it for, sir?
Well, it's a generic question, but actually it looks like it's a great feature for quickly putting together some SQL Server-oriented applications where you have some service, where you exchange messages, instead of kind of developing a large infrastructure which requires web services and components. You can just have a SQL Server-centered broker application.
So I would say, while we're working on and thinking about going ahead to enable Service Broker, I would definitely take a look at things like the App Fabric stuff, because App Fabric has some of those components. If you combine that with some of the Windows Azure queuing systems, you can actually get the same type of functionality as you can with Service Broker. Yes, it's using multiple services on the Azure platform. It's not all SQL Azure based, but you should be able to get to the same end result.
And database mail?
That's not currently on the plans, but if that's something you're looking for, once again, go out to mygreatsqlazureidea.com and put it out there.
Thank you very much.
No, thank you. Question?
Yes. First of all, I'm very impressed about the spatial data.
It's pretty cool, right?
It's really cool. And by the way, I got benefit from it because our shop run a lot of spatial data. Mm-hmm. But here's the problem: is I see the benefit. I can scale out for different server. So many servers, and I can generate a model in the same time. However, it's a problem. The model application we have, most of the time is third party. How can I put that application to the cloud? Because if the database is in the cloud and my application is on the local, the network traffic time is cost too much for us. It takes really long time. I think it will be shorter the time if we can put the third-party exe to the cloud. But how can we do that?
So it's just like a .NET executable.
Could be.
Could be.
Not sure because third party. But most of the time it's a .NET executable.
Yeah.
But we don't have source code.
Yeah. I'm not exactly sure about running, executables up in Windows Azure. If we talk to me offline, I could find that out for you. If you do have, it sounds like you might actually get some benefit from using the sync framework to be able to synchronize data locally with data in the cloud. And we're going to be making some announcements, I think, at TechEd around SQL Azure data synchronization services. So that's might be something that might be a benefit to you. Otherwise, there is There is a download if you go out to Microsoft.com/Windows Azure. Underneath SQL Azure, there is a SQL Azure data sync tool that enables you to synchronize data from your local SQL server up to the cloud and back and forth. So that might be, you know, that kind of scenario would give you SQL Azure as being a central hub of your data and being able to synchronize that down to multiple clients and might provide you a good experience in your application.
Okay. Second question. I see some of the other company that they do the cloud computing too. They support the remote desktop. Do you guys have a plan for that? So it may be a solution for us.
Jim, are you in the room? Jim Nack? Yeah. Hey, RDP to VMs?
Yeah, it's on the roadmap for this year. We don't have an exact date.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. It's on the roadmap. RDP is on the roadmap, but we don't have an exact date for that as of yet.
Okay, thank you.
No problem, thank you. What about Profiler? So the question is, what about enabling Profiler? That's a little bit more difficult for us to do, just being that it's a multi-tenant system, sufficiently being able to, you know, only send events for specific connections. What we are looking at doing is providing the same type of data that Profile would do for you within a DMV. So that's something that we have in the plans as well. You're welcome. Any other questions? All right, awesome. So listen, thanks guys for coming. Make sure you fill out your evals and keep on giving us that feedback. Take care.